Welcome to Suba Unscripted, Power in Us. It's amazing to be back with another episode, and this time with Tessie San Martin. Tessie is someone I highly respect, and I've seen her lead over a decade in different organizations, and now most recently with FHI 360. And I can't really do justice in introducing her because she's done an amazing amount of work in the past decades. So let's dig deeper into her background and what she stands for, and you'll get to know Tessie better. Hi, Tessie.
Well, hello, Suba. Great to be here.
Absolutely. I met you, Tessie, about a decade ago, now nearly a decade ago, when you were leading Plan International USA as the Chief Executive Officer. And I had just been promoted to the position of CEO at Plan International Switzerland. And I still remember meeting you for the first time, and you had this amazing confidence about you. For a first-time CEO like myself, I was just in awe of you. And today, I mean, who would have thought a decade later we would be talking about it on a podcast? So it's just really great to have you here, and I really want to get to know about your background, what shapes you, and the really difficult international cooperation space we are in today. So, what are the challenges you're facing as a leader? So first thing first, Tessie, you're originally from Cuba, you're American, and as a Latina woman leading different organizations, what has shaped you and your identity as a leader?
Wow. All right. Well, thanks for that, Suba, and thank you for the introduction. It's great talking to you. I think you're one of my favorite people. I love speaking with you anyway, and now we're doing it in a podcast. So who knew? I mean, what has shaped me as a leader? I mean, I think in part my background has done that. So you said yes, I'm Latina. I was born in Cuba, and I will say, as I've been reflecting about this. I think one of the things that's been very true about me from the beginning is that one of the hardest questions to answer is, where are you from? For many people I know, it's like, well, I'm from Minnesota, or I'm from, Oklahoma. And when I get asked that question, it's never a short answer. It's like, well, I was born in Cuba. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I did high school in Miami. I went to, I've been living in Washington, D.C. since 1987. So where am I really from? It's not really easy, but at the same time that there's this sense of, I don't know, uprootedness, because where am I really from? I think I have appreciated the grounding that my family has given me. So for example, my grandmother, who was a teacher in Cuba, just made super, super clear that it wasn't an option to not learn about Cuba's history.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so that was part of no matter where I have been, I have always been somehow grounded in Cuba and its history. But every place where I've lived has also grounded me in some way and given me a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. So that's one aspect of my, upbringing. I guess the other one that has really sort of shaped my interest in what I've been doing my entire professional career, what my entire professional career has been about, is a sense of gratitude. So my parents were refugees. They left Cuba with literally nothing, because at that point the regime did let you out, but if you went out, they literally took everything away. So they went from Cuba to Puerto Rico to start anew with nothing, other than some people that they knew, and started again. So a sense of gratitude in terms of everything that's been given to me, the opportunities that I've had, and a sense that somehow I had to pay it back or pay it forward, as it were. And that interest in, working with and to support people and communities that were less fortunate is part of what has always shaped me as well. So is the sense of, who I am, which maybe is a little mixed up, but also a sense of purpose and gratitude given that background. I
I
hope
can
that's helpful.
Oh, very helpful. And I can absolutely relate to what you're saying because, I'm originally Tamil. I was born in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka and grew up in Switzerland, and it's the same thing. And I don't particularly look Swiss, like in the traditional way. So there's always kind of this, I used to say, I'm from Bern, but people always kind of dig deeper, where you're
I
actually
know.
from, right? And it's exactly the same thing. And when you told me that you were born in Cuba, I was surprised because it was also a funny incident how I got to know this because at one point, during our 10-year-long friendship, I was asking you, why don't you become the US president? And you, like, sometimes I was used to women being very modest and saying, oh, I can't really imagine me doing this. But Tessie, you said, I was born in Cuba. I cannot become the US president. So I think for me, the striking part was you had actually thought about it, which was already amazing. But there was this hurdle. And that's how I knew that you actually were born in Cuba. And what you said about, grateful is also that, like you are always taught that, especially as refugee, you want to work hard and kind of you compensate for everyone else, right? Like for all refugees from Cuba or from all, for all refugees from Sri Lanka, because some people didn't have the opportunity and you got to have that opportunity.
Right.
And, I see how that shaped you. But you have started in, multilateral organizations, you have worked across different thematics, and now you're leading one of, leading a global health actor. Along those lines, your background being a refugee, has that made an impact on how you chose your career path or, things you wanted to do?
Yeah, no, like I said, I've always kind of been interested in, okay, so, certainly communities where I have lived are communities that are doing well. And I remember as a young girl, like watching TV, they had those UNICEF ads about those kids. I always, gave my savings to UNICEF. And then I got sort of very interested in overseas. And, I had an opportunity when I was not yet 16. I volunteered for this organization called Amigos de las Americas, based in Houston. It's still around. And at the time, it would take primarily kids from high school and some from college. And these volunteers, you'd raise money to get yourself to several countries in Latin America where it worked. And at the time, which is actually incredible to say, at the time, we were delivering vaccines and we were administering vaccines. So at the age of 15 or 16, I was in Paraguay for 5 weeks vaccinating children.
Wow.
Against the measles. And then I came back the following year, not as a volunteer, but then I was paid to be a supervisor. So at the age of 16, 17, I was supervising other volunteers. And then my final year, I was overseeing a whole region and all of these other supervisors who were. So anyway, so that, first of all, how intriguing this idea of going to like overseas to help people, very old fashioned, ideas of development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a lot of the, we're here to save you type of thing. But this was an organization that raised money from American communities to buy the vaccines and get these volunteers to support ministries of public health in Honduras, Paraguay, Ecuador, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I will say Amigos de las Americas is no longer vaccinating anybody. It's doing community development. And by the way, it is partnered with Plan, which I didn't find out until I had started at Plan.
Oh, really?
I ran into an Amigos convening in a visit of Plan communities in Ecuador. So it was a long circle back, and I'm very happy to be on the advisory board of Amigos today. But it was that taste of, hey, this is really interesting work, and how does all of this work, and why does it work this way, and what does American philanthropy do for communities overseas? There's a lot. The other thing I learned, honestly, Suba, is because at 16, or maybe I was 17 then, I was already, supervising people and organizing vaccination campaigns, and by the time I got to college, I felt like there was nothing I couldn't do. I mean, the
Oh, that's
sense of
amazing. Yeah.
accomplishment
Mhm.
and self-confidence that being in a program like this does for young people, to me, is amazing. And I think it's still one of the good things that an organization like Amigos does.
That's amazing, because that's the very definition of what we were trying to do at Plan, right? Like kind of instill those leadership skills in girls, and quite early on. And you just gave a brilliant example for that. And I didn't know that you had this very early experience in kind of leading. And maybe you can just tell me, because I think, I know how you reacted to me when I became a CEO. You were very very generous with your time and with your honesty, and in kind of instilling confidence in me in the role that I could do. Because when you start this role, and also kind of as a first time CEO, you're kind of I've mentioned this before, because as a first time leader in that space, you also thinking you're spending so much time with your team, talking to people. And for people like us who've organized and who've been kind of community organizers, we're seeing kind of in the value of in doing things more than maybe talking and kind of developing people, right? But now, of course, a decade later, I know how much it means to invest in people. And you saw that quite early on. And when you actually mentor people, and when you decide to invest your time in people, what is the kind of the key thing that you look for?
Yeah, I mean, what a good question. It's that same sense of gratitude. I have been I am today the product of people that decided to mentor me and coach me and invest in me. And all of those people contributed to, my development as a leader. So I see it as part of my responsibility to also do that. And to, help, mentor and support, leaders in our sector. And I'm very interested, in that. And I also recognize, because yes, as a first time CEO, I had been a CEO already a few years when you came in. So I had the benefit of, well, I know how to ride this bicycle, sort of. But it is, I have to say, this position of CEO is a very interesting one, right? Because, I decided to be a CEO because I was tired of reporting to people that I didn't, so at times that I didn't, it's like, well, I don't know if that's really useful, right? So you want to be in charge, so then you can't complain about people that you're reporting to,
Very
right?
true. Yeah.
But what it does is that position is therefore a very lonely position.
Yes.
Who do you talk to? Who do
Yes.
you get advice from? Who do you learn from? Well, it can't really be your staff, because they're reporting to you, and you need to be careful with that, right? In terms of how much you share. You can't, really go to your board, right? Because they're your bosses, right? And
Exactly.
so you can get some advice, but again, there's a lot that you just need to hold yourself. So the most logical group of individuals from whom you can learn and get mentored as a CEO is other CEOs. That is your safe space as a CEO. I have been very fortunate to have had that kind of safe space here in the United States. There are a number of sort of CEO coalitions and groupings that are just very useful in terms of not yes, coordinating action, blah blah blah, but really just being a safe space to learn from each other,
Yes.
and a
And share
safe space.
challenges, right?
Exactly. Share challenges. This is how, and by the way, one of the most useful such convenings was a group of, within Interaction, which is the umbrella group for INGOs here in the US. Every year, it organized a day retreat for women CEOs.
Hmm.
And I found that super helpful. A, because it was a smaller group, because the CEO convening is like 100 plus. This was a smaller group, and one of the things that we started every meeting with was with what were some of the challenges and accomplishments of your year. And I learned a ton because you can imagine a lot of the challenges were people challenges,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And who else are you going to discuss that with? Other CEOs. Here's what I did. This is what really didn't work, right? So it's a place where you can also be vulnerable and share not just your accomplishments, but all the things that didn't go right. So these spaces, for mentorship. So anyway, that's what I wanted to be able to um, do that. I mean, sort of recognizing the challenges and all the questions in one's head when one is a
Hmm.
new CEO. Yeah, I wanted to be supportive of you.
I really appreciated that. And I think I've been lucky to have that kind of network from early on. And I think you also oneself has to be open to kind of ask for the support. That's also one thing I learned quite early on. And I know I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying because, the peer network is so important. And I do remember not only while we were both still at Plan, but also afterwards, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is every time I talked to you, I felt like we should have just recorded that conversation. It's just so enlightening, motivating. And, even if it's not concretely about an issue, it's also to keeping sane doing that work because the area we're focusing on is social impact, it's equity, justice, rights for people, and the world is a very strange place right now, and I'm not sure if things are improving or which direction they're going, and particularly the issues that we were tackling with Plan is also very focused on women's rights, girls' rights, very, very pertinent. And I think a decade later, I feel like, we're at a worse position. And having a peer group to even talk through these things for your own mental health is a healthy thing. So even from that perspective, I always appreciated having that peer network, even among other CEOs of foundations in Switzerland, Swiss foundations, there is this umbrella organization in Switzerland. They even organize sessions, particularly for CEOs or board members, which was excellent, right? So that's definitely good. And, what you mentioned, kind of the word women CEO, right? Because I think it's one of those things where, the challenges are sometimes different, right? Because, and particularly in your generation, Tessie, you might have even more challenges getting to a position where you felt, I am really being recognized for who I am and for my quality rather than being seen, I'm the woman first. But what have your challenges been? And was there a moment in your career where you felt, oh, I need to prove myself differently than a man?
Yeah, what a great question. So I'll tell you a story. So I was at Price Waterhouse, maybe it was Price Waterhouse Coopers at the time, and I was a director there, right? So I had climbed to a certain level. I had rebuilt this whole practice of international development, and I was seeing all these men that, in my opinion, were oftentimes running practices that were less big than my practice, and they were making partner, and I was not.
Mhm.
So what's going on here? So I decided there was a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers called, she's passed away since, but her name was Ann Hopkins. And Ann Hopkins had a really interesting story herself because she, when she it was Price Waterhouse at the time, she did not make partner. And she actually ended up, she had been very successful as a senior manager and so on and so forth. She didn't make partner. She sued the company, the firm. And that case, Suba, went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
I think it's called Price Waterhouse v. Hopkins. And it was a very famous case of gender discrimination that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the process of taking the case up to the Supreme Court, among the things that came out in the light and during discovery, right, where you're looking through people's emails and so on and so forth, what came out is that I guess some of the partners didn't think she could be a partner because she didn't look enough like a woman. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't,
dear.
And so, well, so you can imagine the Price Waterhouse did not win that case,
Yeah.
and Anne asked, she had, she could, in settlement, she had a large sum of money, and actually that she never cashed that check. She framed it, and it was in her house.
What a legend!
But she also said, "I want to be a partner."
Yeah.
And so they let her into the partnership. Mm-hmm. So I tell you all of this because it'll explain a little bit about what I learned from Anne. And so I ended up being a senior manager working for Anne. And I have to say, everything I have learned from writing successful proposals, I learned from this woman. She was absolutely brilliant in business development. She really was. So I decided, well, if I'm going to get advice on how to be a partner, the best person to go to is Ann Hopkins. So I did, and I explained to Ann. At the time, I was no longer reporting to her. So I explained to her what was going on, and she said, she didn't say it like this, but it was kind of like, you dummy, you have to understand, what are you waiting for, right? If you want to be a partner, you have to treat this like a political campaign. If you want to be a partner, go out there and tell people you want to be a partner, so that then they know, and then advocate for yourself. Be loud about it. Be insistent about it. Ask people to support you. And if they're not going to support you, ask why. But the point is, be proactive. This idea that if you do really good work, people will notice. And then it will be okay, right? At some point, obviously, I'm talented. They will notice it, and then I will be crowned partner. And she said, no, the world doesn't work that way. And it's certainly, she said, men generally have less of a problem advocating for themselves. And at the, I think it's less true today, but at the time, right? So this was in the late 90s, but at the time, women did, and so you have to be an advocate for yourself. So I, by the way, not to say that she was the only person that helped me become a partner. I had the male partner for whom I was working at the time, really was actually a good champion and a sponsor and helped me become a partner. So I'm not saying this was just a women's club, but I'm just saying that what Anne told me is maybe something that only another woman could have told me, and certainly somebody with her history of being sort of assertive and championing herself. So that's one of the things that I think, for me, that's one of the most valuable lessons, that if you want something,
ask for it.
You have to go out and get it. You can't just wait for somebody to notice that you want something and have it handed to you. That's not generally how the world works.
And that is something that's generally sometimes in our behavior, right, as women, because we think, the world is 100%, just and right, and everything will work out fair. And not exactly that way. But what you said, I will just kind of underline that 1,000 times because it's like when we were doing fundraising, right? Like no one would know that we need the money as an organization if we don't ask for it. So, and I also learned even when it comes to salary negotiations, I often found it easier to advocate for kind of people that reported to me than for myself.
Exactly.
Right?
What is
And
up
it's the
with
same
that?
thing, right?
What is up with that? It's like, no, obviously I deserve more, but I'll just wait for you to tell me how much more. No, how about I tell you what I want, and then and then we can negotiate.
Absolutely.
And again, a lot of people don't have problems with that. I think women tend to have more of. I don't think that's true anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that
things have changed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, things have changed, but still, though,
But like gender equality, I saw this. It was actually by plan. They posted something interesting, kind of some facts around the World Cup that is happening right now in the United States and Canada and Mexico, and what are kind of the number of countries that have achieved gender equality in the. You have 3 guesses. I mean, none, right?
None.
So it's how sad is that? So things have changed, but because it's in terms of behavior, or I also often get tired of things that we have to tell women what they need to do differently. How about just changing the system?
Well,
right?
no, exactly. Well, and by the way, speaking of, the World Cup in the U.S. women's national team, which is probably the single most successful, franchise in World Cup, for men and women, by the way, in terms of the number of times that they've won, they had to sue to get, better pay. The men haven't won, hardly get out of group play. I hope that they do better this year. But, the women are going all the way to the finals and winning the thing, and they're having to demand.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, in sports, I think that's sadly still the reality everywhere, right? But in terms of achieving gender equality and Switzerland also as a country, we still have to do a lot of work when it comes to kind of maternity leave and, kind of making it easier for women.
Really?
Absolutely. It's
I'm
14
surprised.
weeks.
Oh, well, let me tell you what it is here.
I think exactly. I wanted to, US is probably not the, not the standard there, but, we're thinking about some Scandinavian countries. My point is also how employers deal with it, right? Because as a, especially as a leader in the space, you also have to be recognizing how women are performing under certain circumstances, right? I think, to match that up. So I think countries can do a lot to facilitate that, including, the US or, it depends on the company that you're with. But other than that, it's such a not to have any maternity leave. Come on. It's
well, let me tell you a story about that. So I am, again, this is in the very early 90s. I am the president of a small consulting firm. And I'm the first employee that then is pregnant.
Oh.
Right? Because, there were like 5 or 6 of us, right?
Oh my God, I see that where it's going.
I'm the first. And of course, did we have maternity leave? No. Why? Well, nobody had gotten pregnant before, and and the CEO and and the owners, very enlightened people, but it just had never been an issue. So I said, okay, well, now I'm pregnant. I have to go out and try to see what we can get in terms of maternity leave. Well, here's what I learned, that it is super expensive. Right. And there were no systems, and I don't think they still are, any systems that allowed you to buy that kind of insurance more cheaply. So what do I finally put in terms of a maternity leave for this organization? 3 weeks, Suba, because that's all that we could literally afford. As a small business. Okay. So that's how much maternity leave I had with my oldest daughter. So then you fast forward, and I was, I'm not pregnant at the time, but I am being recruited by Price Waterhouse to come in and be a senior manager in this practice. And I remember, and I'm pretty excited because, Price Waterhouse is doing some really interesting stuff. But what finally convinced me is I said, so what's your maternity leave? And they said 12 weeks. And I go, sold.
So you take any job in Switzerland.
It was like I am so out of, and so and I was, by the way, you could argue, yes, I was going to a bigger firm, but I'm back in as a staff person. I'm not I'm not the president anymore. But it was like, oh yeah, I'm this 3-week thing I'm not doing again. And so, it's also a question of what countries and businesses are,
Affording.
it does affect your talent.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not going to be able to retain talent if you can't figure this out. And countries where you have a certain amount that's mandated, I would argue, make moving around easier, right?
Yeah, very true. And also things have changed again, that people do look at the parenting part as parenting and not only the responsibility of a woman, right? Because, when you look at the conversation in Scandinavia around it, I think it's such a missed opportunity for women to do certain things or not to be able to kind of advance in their careers because, people are now choosing not to have children because, they cannot afford it or, they cannot take a break, etc. So which is not really great. But to look at it as, okay, it's also the responsibility of a man, and how can we actually enable a family to be able to raise a child? That would be kind of the, in terms of kind of an advanced society, that would be kind of the reasonable conversation. Talking about advanced societies, we are still dealing with a lot of basic issues here, right? And, what are the things, Tessie? I'm just wondering, I have my own techniques, but how do you keep going? How do you wake up every morning and kind of find that energy? I want to fight that fight again.
Well, look, first of all, you got to love what you do, right?
Yeah.
I have been, again, privileged. I have always, I guess I have never hesitated to move jobs in order to enable me to continue to pursue what I've wanted to pursue and what I've always wanted to pursue. The maternity leave issue aside, what I've always wanted to pursue is international development, is how do individuals, communities, and countries progress? What kind of, assistance and hand up is needed at what particular points in time? How do you stop it from creating dependency and so on and so forth? Those have been always issues that have intrigued me and excited me since I was, 15. And so, and by the way, I have to say, probably not a good example for anyone, but I have never hesitated to change jobs and even take a lower pay so that I can continue to do the things that I wanted. And that has been possible because I have a supportive family. And to your point, I have had a supportive, husband who has absolutely understood. My partner has understood from the beginning that this is a shared responsibility and so on and so forth. So that has given me a lot of flexibility that other women or other people are just not going to be able to have. Sometimes you're in the job that you are because, you don't, not because you don't have any other options, but because you don't have that flexibility to take a risk and go, explore some other opportunity. Anyway, so it's just to say that what excites me is this. And also the people that you work with. You have to be excited about the people that you work with. I'm always, I've been very, always interested and excited about what makes organizations great.
Yeah.
right? Not just what are the challenges in our sector, but how can we be the best performing? This question of organizational performance is not trivial because there are so many variables and unknown, and there are no specific silver bullets. You can be in an organization that has all kinds of great systems and everything, and it's still underperforming. And so why? So anyway, I get up in the morning excited about the challenges and the opportunities. I still am.
I think, well, which is really, really admirable. I think, you still exude that energy that I've always seen in you, which is amazing and inspires me because what I love about the sector we're in is also how it's becoming more and more professional. Because I still remember when I started off in the sector, people were asking, "Are you volunteering? Are you even getting paid?" Right? So now things have changed quite a bit. And to your point about the team, also kind of looking at the organizational culture, how can we perform well? Because I think it's such an important, and you're an important voice in this, because we are tackling some of the most important issues. I mean, leader like us in the sector, some of the most important issues for our communities to be sustainable, right? For the future. But in terms of the resources, people are not really looking at the resources or the organizations. I mean, if you look at the private sector, people will invest everything in teams and in terms of the culture to perform well. I mean, a nonprofit or a philanthropic organization or an international development organization has to perform even better. And I love your point about organizational performance because we have to be efficient. We have to kind of look at the matrix. We have to look at the organizational culture equally to other organizations or private sector. And I love that conversation these days that this is picking up now. And some of the work we have done around, also with Plan and you more recently with FHI 360 is exactly to that point, right? Like as CEOs, you develop teams to be performing better. And how have you seen that change in the focus, right? Because I think back in the days, that wasn't necessarily about the teams.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think it is something that I think has affected every organization. So I think in general, there's been an effort to professionalize management and boards across, whether it's, commercial, for-profit or nonprofits. But for but for a variety of reasons, I have my own theories as to why that is. It's been later in coming into the nonprofit sector. I think for many reasons. I mean, one is, nonprofits are very mission oriented. That's not to say that commercial entities aren't, but it's just different, right? Nonprofits are set up because there is this need and this desire, right, to accomplish this important mission, to really have, a big impact in individuals and communities and so on. And so you've always been really challenged between the desire to continue to support the mission and put everything that you're raising into programs or investing in the organization.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's the biggest question. Yeah.
Right. And the reality is that we're all living and dying by how well we're managing that expense base. Right.
Yeah.
That the expenses that we have every year. Right. And you want to be able to manage them because if your overhead goes up too much, then you don't get a good rating by charity rating agencies and you get fewer whatever, but, fewer donations, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all of these there are all of these forces that are conspiring to not have you make the types of investments that you need to make because those are going to translate into higher expenses today so that you can reduce your expenses tomorrow. We tend to see things, including systems, including investments in people. Investments in people and systems are usually cataloged in our expense ratio as an expense, not as an investment.
Exactly.
When they really are investments. So, so we have to be able to educate donors. We have to be able to educate boards. We have to be able to educate management so that we can make the type, because organizations are not efficient and effective because they are. It takes constant care and attention, and continuous investment, and making sure that, yes, you're accomplishing as much as possible for your mission today, but you've got to have your eye in the future and thinking through, how do I continue to make this an agile and effective and impactful organization in the future? And I'm telling, it's not easy, because you're always compelled to be investing or putting all the money that you raise into programs. And so it's this balance.
Very true. And I think in terms of incentive, I think things are changing in the philanthropic sector, right? There are conversations happening that, you need to invest more, to your point about what you did when you were 15-year-old. Today, the conversation would be about localization, right? You'll be building capacity locally, to do that work themselves. And there is more conversation happening. We need to invest more into the capacity building, leadership, governance of local organization to actually ensure that sustainability. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't serve anyone's purpose if you have a part in an organization that is dependent on you for 10 years. Right? Like building the right mechanism and exactly investing in the right space, but also for organizations like Plan. I mean, it is a very, very difficult funding environment these days. So yeah. And where do you make the priorities? I'm fully with you. And being a leader in the sector, do you feel you had to, what are the things you had to unlearn? Because you had probably your cycle of leaderships, right? What are the things you had to unlearn to get to the point where you are today?
Wow, what a great question. That I had to unlearn. Well, I don't know if to unlearn, but for sure, you learn over the years, humility. And you unlearn that by making mistakes. And by the way, acknowledging that those are, mistakes. There was a time when there was a thing that I think I may have told you, for several years, there was this thing that was done with the international development sector here called the Failure Festival. And it was it was meant to be a little bit of, tongue in cheek, but an opportunity for organizations to celebrate their failures in front of hundreds of people. And I remember it absolutely freaked out our head of marketing and communications, that I was like at the beginning, the only CEO that was out there speaking about failures. But you have to be able to speak about failures, and you have to be able to learn humility. And I have to say, there are a lot of forces that conspire against that, because the expectation when you're a leader, when you're a CEO, is that you're omniscient, right? Yeah. You're infallible. And of course, that's absolutely not true. And you constantly worry, if I'm too, if I am too vulnerable, will people still follow? And what I have learned also, or maybe I unlearned that not being candid, not being transparent is not a good thing for you or for the organization. That the best thing you can do for yourself and for all the people in the organization that are working with you is to be really straightforward in terms of what's going on.
Yes.
And sometimes that's hard.
Yep.
And sometimes you can't, you could say, well, you don't want to be too candid, but I don't know. I think we're not candid enough, and that hurts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, now with my more modest experience as CEO than you have, that's definitely also my learning. I think, I've always developed amazing rapport and great relationships with teams for just being very straightforward and open. I don't think anyone is upset with you for telling them the truth, right? And I think it's and the best learning is also kind of doing it sooner rather than later, before kind of rumors and everything kind of gets across the organization. But interesting that you're saying humility, because as I, just coming back to the moment when we met, that's also something that was striking to me, is you had that amazing balance between really a great confidence, but also humility. Also kind of knowing what your boundaries are, but also knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that's also, for someone who was kind of starting off as a CEO, is also a great lesson. It's also not to pretend, right? Like not to pretend to know things. And I think I've always hired people that are, in many ways better than me. I've always aspired to do that. And I think it's also some of the learnings I took from our experience, because, not to have that ego or jealousy. I think, the part I think that gets lost sometimes in leadership is also, people are not really humble, but also they have this like very toxic ego and self-confidence that is kind of a deadly combination. But was there a moment for you where you felt like you were working with team members that had that toxicity?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, and in fact, at that point, because those people oftentimes, it's been my experience over the years, are really actually very good. So the question is, right?
Yes,
So it's not a question of, well, because look, if you're toxic and really bad at your job, then the answer is super easy.
It's clear.
There's just like, okay, bye. But if you're toxic and really good at your job, then that's when it becomes difficult. It can become more difficult to make that kind of decision, because you've become, reliant on that person, et cetera, et cetera. And so it still means that, because there's a price to toxicity in the whole organization. There's a price to toxicity in your own effectiveness as a leader, because of what says about you and what you're willing to tolerate.
Absolutely.
So you just have to you just have to do that. And by the way, you also said, what else have I unlearned? I think, and I think this is something our whole sector needs to unlearn. We have been treating the issues around, economic development, and progress as something that can be fixed pretty straightforwardly through projects and one type of funding, right? We give these grants, we work with communities, and if there's something that I think we're all unlearning now in the sector, is that that's not really how the world works. And by doing those things the same way again and again for decades, we've created deep dependencies in some of the very communities and countries that we're trying to help. And that has come back to haunt everyone. So I think as a sector, we need to unlearn a lot of what we thought was true in terms of how dependency is created and real independence, and your own ability to move forward as a community or as a country. What really does create that?
And with all the issues that you're tackling and addressing, what do you think is the most important thing we need right now in terms of a sector, like as a collective? There's so many philanthropic leaders, amazing people out there that are doing a lot of collective work. But what do you think is the single most important thing that we should do collectively?
Well, I mean, for like I said, for organizations like ours, you need to move beyond the idea that your whole effort is around mobilizing resources to do your project,
right?
And be willing to think more broadly about how we mobilize the right resources to to finance solutions that are going to help, more broadly, again, move communities. And it's different, right? Because if it's less about getting resources for my project and more about mobilizing resources for solutions that will address these big problems, maybe, the name of the game is really all about impact and less about your revenue. And therein lies the challenge, right, Suba? Because we all live and die by the need to mobilize more revenue.
It's very
And
true.
what happens if impact is at the expense of the revenue that you would have gotten? I don't know if that's the case, but
that's a major, well, we could do another hour of
whole
podcast about this topic, because it's a major ask for philanthropic leaders and philanthropy and how to invest money, right? Because I think philanthropic leaders can shape that quite a bit and organizations can shape that quite a bit, right? In terms of, because setting the tone and how, leaders work with funding organizations. So yeah, that's, I'm fully with you, because I also, in Switzerland, there's nearly 14,000 foundations. And imagine the power of the collective initiatives when things could be resourced together. So, I mean, there are a lot of really good initiatives for pooled funding, but for what you're addressing, it's still not at a system level, right? Because a lot of organizations are struggling to get the money in to do some of these projects where we could think at the system level. Yeah, fully with you. So in closing, Tessie, I feel like, I could just keep on this conversation with you, but, we'll catch up in private. But my last question, the tagline of this podcast is power in us, kind of the very belief that, I mean, you talked a lot about, what drives you and what is your power. And maybe in closing, what do you feel was kind of the really strong power that you felt was in you, and how did you kind of foster that?
Wow. I don't know what the power is in me. I honestly, Suba, I have always drawn energy from the people with whom I've worked and with whom, and that I've been privileged to get to know and work with, over time. So the power, I don't know if it's the power in me, but it's the power of making those connections and figuring out what we might be able to do together. Because you just said it really nicely. We're dealing with really big problems. The thought that one organization, one funder, with however many resources you raise, are going to make a difference in that. That's just bonkers, honestly, and it's not true. Sometimes, that's what organizations like ours need to do in order to raise money. It's like, give me the money. I've got the silver bullet and the solution.
Yes.
Nobody has the silver bullet. Nobody has all the solutions, but there is a power in the collective. And being able to sort of, again, subsume our egos and put some of our immediate interests aside so that we might be able to achieve something bigger together. I don't know if we can get there as a sector. I hope we can, because I think that's what's required going forward. I have no idea if I answered your question.
No, you did. And I think, I can, from the conversation we just had, I can tell you a couple of other powers that you have. But I think one thing that I really appreciate in, also kind of listening to you today is also the power of listening. I think you seem, after this long career you've had and you still have, and you still, you're still, very much alive and kicking. So I think you want to do a lot of things. And you still have that energy to listen to new things. And I think that is also a power in itself, because oftentimes what I feel, and going back to the kind of the humble and humility part, the worst thing we can do as leaders is when we think we know everything. Kind of that learning piece, right? So I think there's so many things that came out from this conversation. And yes, it's just amazing. I'm just really happy, Tessie, we got to do this. And thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, and you're about to travel to a wedding in Greece. I'm not sure if I can say that publicly, but the wedding will be over anyway. by the time we publish it. And not that people can locate you these days, with AI and everything.
I
We just
know,
have to
seriously.
be very, very careful. But I'll make sure we'll publish it after you come back.
After. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Listen, one of the things I always draw energy from is my conversations with you. So, Suba, thank you. It's been so much fun. I really have appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Tessie. Thanks a lot. This was Suba Unscripted, Power in Us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Tessie San Martin. It was fantastic to learn about her leadership journey and what are the things that still give her energy to get up in the morning. It was such an inspirational conversation, and thanks for being part of it. Please listen and watch the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you.